Hey everyone, I'm Jay.
I'm Sophia.
And I am Scott, and welcome to Witches Betwixt.
And it has been a minute since we recorded, actually. Now that I'm
It's like
looking,
two or 3 weeks, right?
I think it's been a little more.
No.
I think it's
When
it could
when did
I
we talk to Evo? The
uh
7th.
Eva was the
Oh
7th.
fuck.
Yeah, it's been like over a
Jesus
month.
Christ. Wow, we've straight up had a month in between episode recordings. We haven't done that in a while.
And honestly, I think it was cool though, because I mean, we had content scheduled.
hmm
It also really, I definitely needed it for sure.
Yeah, and I did too, actually, because I ended up getting this new job, and then I'm still in the process of transitioning it. So my back bedroom was my witch room, and well, anyway, so my back bedroom used to be my witch room slash Joyce's and then I got this work from home job, so then I had to make the back room an office, and then I had to take all the witch stuff out, and then I had to transfer it all downstairs into the basement. And now I have to reset up the witch room, which is now not also like my witch practicing altar, kind of like where everything is. Now it's also like the shop for shop products. So
hmm
I still have a lot of work. But yeah, so
Working on that Castoria.
having the time off has been helpful.
Mhm.
And honestly, I don't really think the listeners notice it too much because they don't hear these episodes until a month or two after,
hmm
actually.
Mhm.
So uh, it's the nature of the beast. But breaks aside, today's episode, we're talking about fucking nature,
The
which
green
is
path.
it was just really funny. Sophia had actually mentioned this, I think a couple days ago.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, let's get back into kind of like blowing the dust off of our Facebook chat, and like, hey, let's talk, let's record. And Sophia, you were going off on something. You were like, fucking
Fucking
nature,
nature,
bud.
bud.
I was like, well, that's the title of the episode, so that's what we're talking about today. Fucking nature, bud. So Sophia,
It's real
did
good.
you want to kind of talk about your inspiration
Yeah, I
behind
mean,
this?
I was kind of trying to put into words to someone what I do magically speaking because I don't necessarily like have a proper tradition that I follow. Like I take little bits of like culturally relevant stuff from me, incorporate it into the practice, but a lot of what I'm doing is flying blind, and I just kind of most of what I do is based off of just observing nature and watching it and like learning from the plant and how it interacts with me. And so I called it the green path and I was like, yeah, that actually really fucking tracks, right? And then like after I was like, let's talk about nature. I kept getting a ton of synchronicities relating towards like the world tree and how like there's been like damages with it from like what's gone on with all the conflicts in the world with like World War II and like how it feels like the spirit of humanity is kind of sick a little bit, and maybe it was like having to do with like this link being damaged. And this theory my friend brought up. And so we were talking about like trying to nurture the world tree again and like get back to nature and start working on like uh it's okay. I was just
Sounds
letting
of the
that pass.
city.
Just letting that pass because
Yeah.
that can be edited. And working on like I don't want to say fixing the land, but starting to work with the land and repair it and bring in plants that were like natural to the area prior to colonization, like lots of wild strawberries and stuff, and planting those, and just kind of really putting my time and energy into the land and nature itself, right? And
So I had a quick question about strawberries. So
yeah.
wild strawberries, right? They're the tiny little things that you always see, like
Mhm.
they grow up in people's lawns and stuff,
Yeah, and they're significantly softer. So, like, if you've ever
and they're
bitten
edible, right?
into they're okay, just let me explain. They're better than edible. They are little bits of bliss that nature gives you. Like,
Hilarious
commercial
because growing up, I don't think my parents actually knew, but they always told us that they were poisonous as kids.
really?
Don't eat that; it's poisonous. If it grows on the
Wild
lawn, it's
strawberries?
gross. Yeah, like they had no clue what it was.
No,
They were just
they're
like, it's poisonous.
so okay, I'll explain. The flesh of them is significantly softer because a lot of strawberries and commercialized fruit products are selectively cultivated over a long period of time and cross-pollinated between different plants. And what you think of in the modern strawberry, I think that was made somewhere in Europe after the original wild strawberry had been brought back from North America because it was originally indigenous to the area and they didn't grow around the world. So if you're eating like supermarket strawberries, the flesh is really kind of crisp, similar to an apple. Sometimes they crunch if they haven't had like a significant amount of time to soften, right? Whereas if you eat wild strawberries, they're like as squishy as blueberries almost. And they are so much more sweet and delicious and just incredibly good for you. Like, they're little packets of just amazing. That's the best way I can describe them. If you've had wild strawberries, you're never gonna wanna have anything else because it just doesn't even compare, you know?
I'm
It's
bummed
like
because they would grow in my lawn, like my front
mhm,
lawn as a kid, and in my backyard, and we would we would play witches and stuff, and we would take them and smash them and mud and all kinds of fun
mhm,
stuff.
good offerings for the spirits.
Thanks.
Um, but yeah, no, and it's similar to like free range cattle as opposed to factory farm stuff. Like there's a completely different taste to it, and the animal's
Right,
not
yeah.
sick and suffering and being pumped with antibiotics. Like
I have
because there's
definitely
a
tasted that
very
difference.
yeah, and other than just, like, the physical difference, because I am not just, like, a physical person, as y'all know, I'm very much spirit model. There's, like, a large difference between what's going on with the plant that's, like, been able to grow up in nature in its own environment, and you come and you take a little bit of those berries, and you don't necessarily hurt the plant while you're doing it, and you don't clear out all the berries on the bush, right? And you make sure just to take the ones that are so ripe that if you don't pick them, they'll go to rot. That's what you do when
Mhm.
you're eating them. So, from a very young age, you learn to kind of watch the plant and observe it and work with it and do stuff with it that helps it, but also helps you. And you start developing a relationship with that plant. So, like wild strawberries, raspberries, beans, there was a whole bunch of stuff that my mom used to grow at her house. And like, we used to eat off the land a significant I wouldn't say it was like half of our diet even because like we did live in a small town that did have supermarkets and stuff, but when I wanted snacks and I wasn't really wanting anything in the house, I could just go out back and pick from the garden, and that was always really nice. um and yeah, I just kind of wanted to like fucking say, let's get back to nature. I mean, it's spring. Half the wheel of the year is horny and rabbits, and the other half is spooky bats. So we got to do horny rabbits a little bit in nature.
I'm
So I figured
definitely behind
Sorry.
the
Speaking of which, I actually like bought myself some kinky rabbit ears with some of my work money. Like,
there
I'll
you
show
go.
y'all when I get it. But I wanted to pass it over to Scott because you'd actually done some research on like the world tree and green path and stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, without I guess beating a dead horse, I guess everyone, all of our listeners kind of know that, nature plays a huge part in what I do. I've talked about it a lot. Um, and caring for the earth and just kind of being with it, understanding my place as a part of nature, moving through those same cycles as nature does, and not making sure to take myself out of this kind of very colonized idea of I am something separate than nature, you know? This idea of, no longer, I don't seek to conquer nature, but once again, like I said, to live with it. Now, as far as the this world tree, right? As far as this goes, we've seen a lot of this throughout a lot of cultures, even themes that may not necessarily be the exact same thing, but there's always something similar. We see this in ritual ceremony with certain traditions. They'll have like a central pole in order to call down the divine beings into the temple or the
Yeah.
sacred space. I know in Perry style and voodoo, they have that. Although I won't pretend to know much about that. But interestingly, what I'm trying to get at is that this idea that the world tree is kind of this super highway, right, for witches seeking to travel the realms, or through spirit flight or astral projection, what have you. Kind of also a roadmap. The upper world, the middle world, the lower world, kind of on the branches, or the shaft of the tree, whatever, the trunk, whatever, of the tree. Excuse me. Um, and we still see this. We still see this kind of once again, the spiritual superhighway slash map. We see this with. I always pronounce this badly. How do you say the Nordic tree of life? Who knows how to say this better than me?
Yggdrasil.
I think it's
Thank you. I say it horribly.
Yggdrasil.
I apologize. Um, we see this with just the tree of life symbology, which we've seen throughout Europe for a long time. Excuse me. We see this even in Jewish mythology with the Kabbalah. Now, the Kabbalah, of course, is distinct, right? The Kabbalah is an internal sort of an internal alchemy, if you will, right? However, once again, I mean, obviously that is at the very heart of the idea of the world tree is a an internal alchemy. It's an internal process. It's a place maybe that you can visit. It's a realm. It's an idea. It's a map to wisdom and knowledge that maybe our ancestors once carried, or particular spirits that govern spheres in as far as the Kabbalah is concerned. And although there are distinct traditions outside of each other with distinct cultural nuances, it is an interesting cultural. I love looking at cultural phenomena that seems to span cross culturally, where we can find similarities, and I always find that really interesting. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But once again, of course, too, is I suppose, I guess, that the only real connection to, I guess, the physical realm that we can kind of make of, because that's obviously what the topic is today, but I suppose we're discussing also the spiritual side of things regardless. But
It's all
um,
connected, right?
exactly, that's exactly what I was trying to say, is the, as above, so below, as within, so without, as the body, so the soul. So when you were discussing this kind of sickness of the world tree, this kind of damage, as you say it. It was interesting because not that long ago, I know that both of you have some level of anxiety. So you know how, like,
No.
anxious people, we like to have like debates and conversations and arguments, and like we have like whole conversations about things that we haven't had yet, or you know what I mean.
We amp
Um,
ourselves up
That's how
for
you
things that
prepare.
haven't happened.
I mean, sometimes it's not always necessarily an argument for me. Sometimes it's just like a conversation that hasn't happened. But I was having this whole dialogue about I was discussing how the soul can get sick, and how and I was, oh, that's right. It started by talking to my mom. That's right. And then I was just kind of started a dialogue in my own head. But I was talking to my mom about how um when people pass on, and sometimes something happens to the spirit, that they become sick, and she was very, like, she had a really hard time with that concept. And I was like, the body can get sick, so therefore so can the soul, right? um or the
Hmm.
spirit, what have you. And once again, it kind of, what I'm trying to draw the connection to is that it's interesting because the world tree is, once again, it's both something that we can kind of, in an archetypal kind of symbolic way, interact with in our physical life, but also internal life. You know what I mean? So why not? The world tree connects to systems like in a bard, I believe in the 1700s, maybe, or farther back. No, I'm trying to remember the exact date. Unfortunately, I don't know if it had it, but there was a bard in Europe. Uh, it was later on in like medieval Europe, so it wasn't that far back. But he came up, and I believe I talked about this before. But the three cauldrons, the cauldron of wisdom in the head, the cauldron of,
Sounds familiar.
hold on one second, the cauldron of motion, and the cauldron of warming. Each one, so the cauldron of wisdom is at the top of the head. The cauldron of motion is in the chest, and the cauldron of warming is in the pelvic region. A lot. And now, if you can, I'm sure you can imagine the striking similarities, although not the same thing as, like, the Vedic chakra system and the Chinese energy centers at the bending points of the body. A lot of the time, these kind of it's interesting to see how much of relation to the world tree and the energetic systems of the spirit body also relate, and therefore also relating back to our physical presence in the world that we interact with around us, right? So, I apologize. Trying to remember where I was getting at.
You were kind of talking about, it's kind of like the overlap of the different thought.
Oh, right. And that's what I was talking about. I was relating to what Sophia was talking about, with her perceptions of the world tree being sickly in some way and affected. But it makes sense. That's what I was trying to say. And how that relates back to the human condition right now. The heightened levels of anxiety and, mental illness, the amounts of, needless death that has occurred due to our inability to correctly handle a pandemic. The tensions created by environmental disparities, that are created through institutionalized issues.
Right.
Yeah, it makes sense that what Sophia's sense of things. That's what I was trying to get at.
So actually, where I drew a little bit of information from that, I wanted to give context for. Um, I've been reading a lot of Indigenous knowledge books lately just to learn as much as I can about like my family and my extended relatives, because like where my family comes from essentially is the plains, right? And I've been reading some stuff from Russell Means. If you know about him, he was one of the leaders of the American Indian movement, AIM, is you've heard about it before. They like
Okay.
went and took over Wounded Knee in 1973 to get the United States government to live up to its treaty obligations, and there was like huge conflicts going down. But throughout the books that I've read, that the universe just keeps kind of sliding my way, because like the first one I just found in a used bookstore, it was Black Elk Speaks, which was from the same group, the Oglala Lakota, commonly called Sioux, but incorrectly called Sioux.
Right.
And they talked a lot about, in both of these books, this sacred tree and how it was withering and dying. But in one of his visions, he said that the root of it still lived, and that was something that really stuck with me, and like looking at all the other stuff, it really kind of made sense. It really feels like, that whole principle of as above so below. If humanity's spirit is sick and the world is showing signs of being sick, then our spirit and everything else is going to be sick as well, right? Because all the parts of the whole web push on each other, and something that's making an impact on one side is going to be felt on the other, because it's all connected. We're all related, and we're all from the same earth mother. We're not immune to anything happening on it, right? So it all just kind of really made sense, to bring it up, as like a project that I wanted to work on with my friends, and also as something that we could just like talk about and have some serious discussion on, like what we can do to actually like really start as magic practitioners, using our craft and our energy to try and bring people back to that connection with nature. Because I feel like a lot of what goes on with society and um the sickness in the world really correlates to the illusion of separation, right? This idea that things are individually packaged from each other. I've mentioned this in former episodes, but I'm going to double back to it, and like, if you understand that absolutely everything is interconnected, you can't poison the waters because you're poisoning yourself, you're poisoning your kids, you're poisoning the future generations.
Right.
That's a part of you. You can't do that, and no more than you can take a knife to your hand and just start cutting off fingers if you really understand it like that, right? But that disconnect and that sickness is like a kind of like almost spiritual parasite that's been feeding on us. It's like this constant emptiness where we don't have it's almost like in Western world we don't feel centered in our bodies or centered in a collective, where we have this hollow within ourselves a lot of the time that just keeps wanting to be filled because there's something fundamentally missing in our way of life. And until that gets filled, we're constantly going to be just reaching out monkey paw style, trying to grab every fucking thing we can to fill that void, and it's going to just keep making the rest of the world sick until there's nothing left. And that's why we have like oil corporations who value money that isn't even a real object over the future existence of the fucking planet. Like, it is a sickness in the heart, in the mind, in the body, and the spirit at this point, and we really have to start addressing it. And I think the only real way to do that is to start with the planet first and looking what we're doing with it, because it's a mirror for what we're doing to ourselves.
Yeah.
It's no accident that we're like 2/3 water, or whatever it is, the exact same ratio of land to water that the planet is. Like,
Mm,
we're representations of the world that we grew out of. We're her children. We're like the earth, and we know it's a living being too. We know she's a
right.
living
Yeah.
being. We're her children, and we're supposed to be here to take care of her and do the things that she can't do.
I went camp for my birthday, and I mean, it was more like glamping. We had a very nice cabin in a state park. It was so funny. The joke, kind of like the running joke of the trip, is we'd like look at a tree, we'd be like nature, and then like we look at a rock and we'd be like nature. Like we would just go around and like point at things and be like nature. It's good
Oh,
for you,
one of my
nature.
one of my favorite fucking things to do when I'm in nature is to go around and talk with the plants and show people stuff. Like, I have knowledge of certain plants and what you can do with them. Like, you can
Mhm.
use dandelions for making wine, or you can use their root, which is extremely bitter, but it's also actually quite healthy for you. Um, there's like, you can find mint and berries and like yarrow and Queen Anne's lace
Mhm.
and like every single thing pretty much that a lot of people think of as weeds can actually be used as a medicinal plant. For example, thistles, pain in the ass, they will stab your thumb, they are unpleasant, you can use them as medicine. Nettles,
That'll.
stinging nettles,
Yep.
horrible to grab, great medicine.
So I actually have a massive yellow dock. I know the root is very useful. I know you can from the root. Um, but I don't know if I should like I don't know, like, because if I know if I rip out the root, maybe I'll wait till the seed come back.
What you can do, if you don't want to have them in that spot and he's getting up your ass about it, is take them out and put them in pots. Like, a lot of plants are actually really good at being able to be transplanted, especially things of what we would think of as weeds, right?
They're
Because they're
super hardy.
they're
Yeah.
resistant and hardy. Yeah. So you can actually, like, as long as you don't damage the root system too much, and then you give something to replace it in the lawn, it's really easy to just take a medicinal plant out of the lawn and then you have it in a pot, you know?
That's really, yeah, that's actually a good idea. The dock though, the yellow dock, it's very the root, as I understand it, is very long. So I don't know. Maybe I need
Do
a
they have tap
bucket.
roots? Is that why?
Huh?
Do they have tap roots?
I don't know what a taproot is. I'm
So like
so
tap roots are these kind of like almost fibrous like roots, and their job is sort of like to feel out the surroundings to see where it can go.
I don't.
But they're super important to the plant's growth. That like a lot of tubers and like really tough root, like those tough roots like galangal, mandrake. I'm trying to think of other things.
Which also
Uh,
don't fuck around with mandrake if you aren't very careful with what you're doing, because that is a very potent root. Just saying.
oh yeah.
Mhm.
We could do a whole episode on mandrake root one day. But yeah, the taproots, when the taproots fall off for whatever reason, the plant just doesn't seem to survive. You have to like.
I
That's
think
one of the
it's
reasons
kind of
why.
like it's almost like the nerve center of the plant. Like I don't want to like translate it over to animal biology, but it's like the for example with mushrooms, the mycelium network underneath is actually what the mushroom is, and what you see coming out of the soil is its reproductive organ.
Hmm. I
So I think
think
it's kind of
what it
similar
is
with
with
taproots, but don't quote me on that.
Yellow Dock, basically it was one of my like local pagan Facebook kind of friends was actually joked and said, hey, if you want to get rid of the dock, you'll basically have to burn it to the ground, because like if you pull on the root, you cannot pull that shit out by hand, so I actually have to dig down and I have to like dig it out. So I guess
Yeah.
that's what she was kind of talking about. Because I did try and yank
If
on
you
it, and I was like, yeah, I could pull this. Me being like, yeah, I could pull this out. I was like, no, I can't.
if you have a long enough knife, you can cut it in a cone, which tends to work.
Mm.
Um, but you might have to just kind of hack the centerpiece of the root at some point. But if it's a really fibrous and tough one, as long as you get like a significant chunk of the root network, it should survive transplanting.
Mm-hmm.
Some plants you can transplant just by cutting the fucking stem and using like growth hormone on it and sticking it in dirt, and then it reroots. It's wild.
Wow.
That's actually the basis behind doing cuttings, because I used to work in a nursery when I was back in my hometown, and what they'd do is they'd take plants that got to a mature age. They'd cut certain sections off of them when they were trimming them to like shape them how they wanted, and then they'd send those to the cutting room shed. And people who had faster dexterity or who they thought couldn't lift as much were in the cutting room, and I got put in the cutting room. But I could also outpace pretty much everybody at the table aside from the most senior cutting ladies, and they were quite impressed at how well I was doing. But my hometown is semi-desert, as I've mentioned before, and going in a greenhouse in a desert is a fucking nightmare, because it is all the humidity of anything you
Mm.
could possibly imagine. It's really humid, and it's like 50 fucking degrees in there. I am not exaggerating. Like you could die in those greenhouses, so you had to rotate who went in to do the plantings. So you'd have like a 15-person team doing the cuttings, and you'd go one at a time, and it would be like your turn every dozen entries. Like that's how much cool down time you had. And then other than that, the cutting shed would be like indoors in a cool spot where you weren't getting baked on by the desert heat, right? So it was kind of neat, and you had to be good with working a knife. But you'd take a plant and you'd cut them in a specific way to ensure that like they had the right amount of nodes, and then you dip them in a rooting hormone, and then you'd put them in a tray. And then when it came time, you'd have to go and take that tray over to the greenhouse, and there'd be like little plots, and there'd be certain patterns that you had to memorize for how to plant certain plants. And you'd always try and get it in on like the right depths and stuff. And then they'd like evaluate you, because like your trays were written with your name on it. So if your cuttings weren't taking because you hadn't like used the right amount, they could come back and like be like, "Oh, your cuttings aren't doing very good," sort of thing. But yeah, it was interesting. Like that's way that a lot of nurseries get a lot of their plants to grow, is they just cut them and rooting hormone them, and then it takes, and then it has a whole new plant grow out of it.
That's so wild to me. Like gardening and plants and everything like that was always such a like that knowledge was just not. I didn't grow up with it, right? I didn't grow up around it. So like my mom had a couple house plants. I couldn't even tell you what they were. I don't even think she could. One was like an ivy looking thing. One was like this tree looking
One's
thing.
probably a fern. Ferns are
Yeah.
very common houseplants.
Yeah, and and she had a couple plants that she took care of them. She loved her plants. She had no clue what they were, but she loved her house plants. Um, and my grandfather, he was actually really into gardening, so he would grow like tomatoes and like kind of like your typical standard like garden vegetables. Um, and when I did the garden last season here, because he owns this house, he got like really excited and he brought me tomato cages over. He's like, I don't garden anymore, but this is cool that you're doing it. But I just never really grew up with that knowledge, and so now,
Mhm.
especially because my friend Rob, who he was the former Pagan Pride president, and he's also very prominent in the like the heathen community. Um, he uh he makes this post every year about local things that people think are weeds, and
Mm-hmm.
he talks about them, and he's
Ooh.
like, this is not a fucking weed, this is
Mm-hmm.
also not a weed, this is this. And he encourages other people to post their pictures. And when he made his annual post this year, it really got me started on looking. And I was like, wow, let me go look at my front lawn. I was like, well, this is a thing. Like all these plants, I was like, these are all separate plants. Before I would just look at it as, oh my god, the lawn, like just cut the lawn, get rid of the weeds, whatever, move on.
Mhm.
And then I really started to look into these different plants. And so now I noticed, as like I walk around the neighborhood, I see like you know all these giant, tall, quote unquote, weeds growing everywhere. And I'm like, oh, I recognize what that is, and that's useful.
Yeah.
And especially if I'm walking by, like I know a school is not, public property, but I'm like, well, I know there's a lot of broadleaf plantain in front of this school, and I don't think anyone would care if I took some because they just cut it anyway. So, I'm kind of like, I make mental notes now just in my immediate area of like where I can find these different, plants that I may want.
God, this is gonna be a shameful confession, but I named my Instagram handle the Lavender Bandit. I don't care. You can try and follow me if you want. It doesn't matter. But it was because I would like see lavender either like if somebody would like had it like up on their porch. I'm not gonna walk up on their
No,
property
I
and
will
take it, right?
never, ever, ever take from someone's like obvious house, or like, you know what I mean?
I
Like, no, I
have
would never
though,
do
because
that.
like there's okay, so there's tons of people who don't properly care for their lavender bushes and they don't pick any of it because when you pick it, it encourages the plant to keep growing it and
Mm-hmm.
like
Well, if it's like spilling onto
you
the
can have it.
sidewalk.
Yeah, and like here's the thing, I can always tell a lavender bush that the owner has worked with because they keep picking it and it keeps blooming beautifully late into the season. Like you'll see people who have their lavender bushes still blooming sometimes in September. And then you'll see somebody who's gone to grass seed in like August and you're like, "Man, your plant like wanted you to pick that stuff." Like it didn't get the chance to actually share it with you. Like um certain plants actually when you pick like say strawberries off of a strawberry plant, it stimulates the plant to continue producing and growing. So
Same for green
um
beans.
yeah, so you actually want to, in certain circumstances, absolutely be taking small amounts from them at a time. So if you were to like go up to a lavender plant and cut 7 of them at it, or not even cut because you can pick really easy from lavender without stressing the plant out, right? You always have to kind of like develop that relationship with certain plants. Like when I'm picking cedar, for example, I can do it with the tree without needing to bring like clippers because if the plant really wants to hold on to the cedar, it's going to be really strong and supple. And if I'm trying to yard on something that's really strong, the tree has a lot of energy put into keeping that branch there because it's drawing a lot of nutrients from the sun there. You don't want to go for that one. The
Mm-hmm.
ones that are drawing in less nutrients are going to be drier and snap incredibly easy by comparison. So when you're doing it this way, as opposed to using cutters, you're not taking the stuff that the tree is actively getting energy out of. You're taking stuff that the tree is naturally going to start shedding anyways before it has to, and then you can utilize it as a medicine. And so when you like learn to start doing stuff like that, like sometimes people use plants that have their herbs dried and burnt for whatever purpose that it might be for their individual practice. If you need leaves from that plant immediately, not everybody realizes that most plants naturally do have this process where they're shedding leaves that are no longer super useful to them so that they can keep growing. It's just like a snake shedding their skin. So you can go and pick those leaves that are already dried and use that for your practice pretty much on the spot if you know how to observe the plant and not try and assert your will over top of it as though it didn't have its own needs, wants, and desires too. You
Mm.
know, like when you respect it as an individual being that has its own sovereignty, that is like related to you and in the environment, and you can start working with it in a better way, you start developing those relationships, and the plants like naturally will teach you that way if you just observe how they work with you when you're working with them, you know? Like they
Mhm.
want to teach you how to do that stuff, and it's pretty neat, you know?
I'm definitely getting that feeling,
Absolutely.
especially like with these, because my grandfather actually like, so I pulled the weeds out of like the lawn area. I harvested basically what I wanted, and and organized it and all, and then I cut the rest. But now it's growing out of control all over again because we've gotten so much rain. But uh so I've been watching, especially like the wood sorrel, which I always thought was clover because it looks like clover, and so I just was like, oh, they're 3-leaf clovers, right? But it's not. It's called wood sorrel, and it actually I keep letting it grow up in the I guess the flower bed area that I have. So I keep the lawn semi under control, but the flower bed area, I just let whatever was growing in there keep growing.
Hmm.
And of course he my grandfather was like, what the hell? And I was like, I was like, they're actually useful stuff. He's like, they're weeds, but he's can't talk him out of that. But I have him keep growing, and the wood sorrel actually, these really pretty little yellow flowers bloom in it, which I was like, oh wow, like if you really let these things keep going, they're actually pretty, like not like they're just like very, like they're visually pleasing to look at. They're not just these massive eyesores, right, that people think they are. um but
Mhm.
I've been watching these plants grow, and I've been feeling a connection with them. And yeah, like some people are like, oh, they're just weeds, but to me, I don't know, they're growing in my
They're
area.
medicine.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And and I feel I definitely feel a certain connection with them. And I've been thinking about kind of like, we have patterns, right, especially lately, with like the fall of society and late stage capitalism and all that. um
Hmm.
we always talk about, like how we need to get back to nature or live with nature, incorporate, we talk about that so much. And sometimes, and we just do this as humans and as people, sometimes we talk a big game, but what do we actually do to try and
Hmm.
implement what we say? And I can honestly say that that is the one thing that I am implementing, is I am making it a point to know and identify in my immediate surroundings where I live. And when I move, it'll be the same rule, that I want to know what all of these plants are. I need to
Hmm.
know. Why wouldn't I know that? It makes no
Hmm.
sense. Like, why wouldn't you want to know what's around you? And I think it's
Right.
because we've always just I don't know, especially growing up in the city, it's nature is just property. It's something you own. It's your little piece of land, and
I'll say
it's
this. With Western attitudes and how we walk across the earth as though when we do so, we're on top of it. It's under our foot. We are the ones who
on
walk the surface.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. It's this attitude like we own it, and we don't at all for a second. We take care of it and we come from it. And and we have to live in harmony with it. There's just no other way, you know?
Mhm.
Like, do you know how hard it is actually to get off planet? Do you know how fucking ridiculous it is to get to the nearest star system that could
Mhm.
potentially actually have life? How many hundreds of years of space travel, even with really high grade technology, that would probably still make us take? Like, I know we
Yeah.
talk a lot, a big game about like space and all these cool future technologies because we dream of the stars a lot, but like for all intents and purposes, we come from the earth and we live at the earth and like if the earth dies, then in a way we die too, you know?
Mhm.
Because our parent, and
Not
unless we
even.
become like some big space age colonization, ugh, I don't even want to think about the implications of that. Uh, species, you know, it's gonna be a fucking nightmare, and I wanna hear what you have to say, Scott, but I just gotta say one more
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah, go ahead,
This
please.
is something that's always been on my mind, is that, like, do we even have the right to do that, you know? Like, of course, Western society isn't going to question colonization, and they're naturally going to be like, "Of course we have the right to colonize space. Why wouldn't we? You know, there's
Right.
nobody even there." But, like, think about it this way. Say we do find a planet that can harbor us and let us actually live there.
Mhm.
By us going and putting ourselves on that planet, we have eliminated what other species would have been able to rise and actually have that be their home. Some other intelligence would have developed out of that planet almost assuredly, you know.
Mhm.
It seems like for life to come about, all you need is the building blocks and the right settings, and it just happens, you know. So if we do that, we're basically saying these other cradles of life
Don't
that could
matter.
spawn something unique and completely individual unto itself should only really exist for our personal benefit. And that's some really fucked up shit. It's different
Mhm.
if we like take, say, Mars, a planet that at this point doesn't have a hospitable atmosphere, and say we
We cultivate it and make
terraform
it.
it.
Yeah.
That's entirely different. We're not fucking stealing something away from other people or having a moon base. We have every right to have a fucking moon base if we want to, you know? There's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't. It's our own planet. There's nothing that's going to live on there. It doesn't have like a tenable like a workable atmosphere. Like there's nothing wrong with that. But the moment we start trying to take other planets for ourselves, what we're essentially doing is replacing life that could exist and grow uniquely and share the cosmos with us and supplanting it with ourselves the exact same way that happened here and all over the world, because colonization is a sickness that wants to fucking go until there is nothing left but it, and it knows not but to consume.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, what were you gonna say, Scott?
No, just that it's a shame that, when you were talking about how we're in Western society we see ourselves, we see nature as underfoot, right? Instead of the idea of nature being the thing that's holding us up, right? Uh,
Mm.
Instead of kind of understanding, really, it's funny for us. They seem simple, right? Like the idea that we walk on the shoulders of our ancestors, and the earth itself, nature and the dirt and the soil and the roots and the trees and everything else. But yet, no, it's just it's a shame. That's all. Because I have these conversations with Christian, not necessarily about spiritual things, but Christian is a friend, a really long time friend of mine who lives with me. If you don't know that, listeners, but me and him have like political conversations and like socio-political conversations, and it's just a shame. You know what I mean? You kind of get like, I don't know, feel a little defeated, when you think about the Western idea of life, um,
Yes.
and how it for us, especially, like for him, for instance. Well, I don't want to give his story, so I'll say mine. How it's especially when you're different, right? When you're born different in Western society, you're not, you're not fitting in, you know what I mean? And then you have all these ideas, you're not supposed to have ideas, you're like, the Western society is supposed to teach you what to think instead of doing what they should do and teaching you how to think, you know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And when you start falling outside of this you know,
The norm.
the norm, and all of a sudden, it makes your life 100 times harder. It's just, I don't know. I'm sorry. It just makes me annoyed. There's just so much going on, and like this topic of nature and how it relates to marginalized groups of people and how it relates to just human life in general. Like just the fact that, like, I was thinking the other day about how I remember when I was getting my gallbladder removed, for instance, to go back to talking about like folk medicine and
Mm-hmm.
ancestral medicine. Um, the doctor, well, one of the doctors was making fun of me because I was saying how I used flaxseed tea um, and apple cider vinegar to help when I had an attack before I got it removed. And the one doctor
And
thought it
did
was
it help?
absolutely ridiculous. Oh, it absolutely helped.
Right.
100% helped. But and then this older, more mature doctor came in and was curious about these home remedies. And even he was kind of like, he was more polite, but even he thought it was like,
A
because he was
crock of
like, then
shit.
maybe I'll suggest it to my patients, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and of course, they kind of they kind of take the position of, oh, it was purely, placebo, right? Placebo
Mm-hmm.
effect, which of course is ridiculous, right? Um,
It's like
instead of
all
understanding that, like,
medicine comes from herbalism. All of it.
I mean, it has
Yeah.
to, right? It comes from, or right? I mean, like the things that are in our medicine or are 9 times out of 10 organic material. They're compounds and alkaloids that we can isolate, and oftentimes they're found in, once again, minerals. They're found in plants and trees. They're found
Mm-hmm.
in bugs and other animals.
Nature.
Right. A particular bacterium, like, like, it's funny how they have this, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a superiority complex, but it's this weird disconnect. And I'm just like, what, like, because in my mind, I remember thinking to myself back then, I was like, why can't you just accept that, these tonics, like Appalachians have been using things like apple cider vinegar. They've been using, what is it called? Fire cider
Mm-hmm. Yep.
and what is it? Elderberry syrup.
Elderberry
Uh,
syrup, yeah.
yeah, they've been using that forever. Like, like there's something to this stuff. You know what I mean? And they refuse to accept these, the old medicine. I'm not saying that we need to get, like, I'm not one of those crazy people who's like, modern medicine is just a way to enslave you, microchips and whatever. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, like, I think it's totally acceptable if you make, like with your broadleaf plantain,
Right.
making a salve for like cuts, paper cuts, um, like wounds, you know what I mean? Like bites
This
and stuff like that. Like, that's perfectly fine. Even to be honest with you, there are a lot of people who go see professional herbalists, and they give them antiviral herbs, they give them antibacterial herbs and stuff like that. And they have a lot of success. I think it's a lot more than just placebo effect. You know what I mean? It's the organic material. And granted, of course, you have to be careful. That's another thing. People, they often think that well, it's just herbs, you
right.
know.
It's
But
just
I'm gonna fucking give a take on that after.
but the problem is like, I kind of want to tell people, in about a year, I want you to go into my garden. I'm going to point them to my belladonna plant and say, eat 2 of those berries and tell me if it's just herbs, you know? Um,
exactly.
like, no, it's like the same way with the mandrake root. When Sophia was like, be careful. I mean, there is not a culture that has had access to that root that has not acknowledged its benefits in both medicine and sorcery. There is it's just, it radiates, like its spirit is just really loud. It's the same thing with the belladonna. It's the same thing. That's why the silencias are so important to a lot of medicine. Because the silencias, for whatever reason, that's why, for instance, in European culture, they're known as the witching herbs.
Mm.
Folklore abounds with belladonna itself. In fields where it's grown in the past, there was said to be a woman in a black dress is said to haunt belladonna fields. But of course, as modern thinkers, as animists, we can acknowledge that holy shit, that was the spirit of the belladonna plant presenting itself in manifest form.
Right.
Right. Now, of course, I'm not asking physicians to acknowledge that. I'm just trying to make a point that the natural world and us are one thing. We are natural. We are part of the process. We are just as much part of it as the trees and the animals that coexist alongside of us. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I can't help but shit, I lost my train of thought. Never mind, Sophia, go. You had something to say.
Okay, so when you said that, oh, those are just herbs, I was like, yep, here's where I was going to go with this. Do you know what's the difference between a drug and a medicine? Dose level.
Oh, okay.
So, for example, or sorry, I meant to say a drug and a medicine and a poison.
Oh, okay.
Right. Okay. I really just want you to say it.
I was like,
yeah.
drug and medicine. I was like, aren't they kind of the same thing?
I'm going to talk about foxglove. If
Yes.
you've seen them, they're a beautiful plant. They look
course.
like a helix, and each of them have these like very cute appendages coming off that literally look like a fox could wear them as gloves. That's why they're called foxglove. And they come in a multitude of colors. They're formerly known as digitalis, and
Yep.
they're used to make heart
Heart
medicine. Okay.
Mhm.
They save people's lives in a very low targeted amount. In a high amount, it'll kill you. It'll
Mhm.
stop your heart
Yep.
or whatever it does. And for example, tobacco. Indigenous people used to use tobacco all the time in ceremonies without getting addicted to it because they weren't smoking whole fucking cigarettes. They would have a bowl, they would smoke it, and they would share it, and they would do that however often that they were required to do that by their traditions, and it was different group to group. But you were not just smoking tobacco constantly throughout the day, right? And that's what would form addiction. So like
Yep.
hearing about like tobacco addiction prior to contact was like just not a thing, right? And if you
Mhm.
look at how much tobacco is in a cigarette, that's enough to fill like 3 or 4 or 2 to 3 or maybe even 4 like just pipes of like weed worth, because like I smoke weed out of a pipe all the time, right? And you could put tobacco in there just the same way. And how you intake these substances and the amounts that you take greatly interact and differ with how you're going to have a relationship with it. And
Mhm.
something that could just be a medicine can turn into an addictive drug. And something that could just be a medicine or a drug can turn into a lethal substance if used in higher
Absolutely.
levels. And like it doesn't even need to be something refined, because like people hear about like overdoses on opiates and like cocaine and stuff like that all the time. But like you don't hear necessarily about someone dying from lily of the valley, right? Because people
Mhm.
know that's a toxic substance. And same thing with
Tonka.
oleander. I was going to go with
Oh,
it's
oleander
it's
too.
it's often used just as a very pretty plant to people, but it is one of the most poisonous substances that you can fucking find.
And
Like
Tonka too.
yeah, so it's stuff like that, right? Some things straight up can't be used as medicine and they're just like
Mhm.
harsh, but a lot of it can, and there's a reason why multinational corporations still go and bug indigenous people world around for their knowledge of plants. And then they steal that knowledge and then they charge people ass loads of money to get this medication that they claim that they have done the research and paid to make, but they like steal it 9 times out of 10. It's also kind of like how the companies that are making insulin keep raising the prices of insulin to absurd levels and acting like, it's for research and development. But formulaically, it's almost identical to what it was ages ago. And insulin was invented by the Canadian government, so they didn't even have to pay for the patent, really. And it was literally just like given to the world. And there's like no reason why it should be more expensive to have insulin in America than it is in Canada, other than corporations and their extreme greed. And that's what a lot of this comes down to when you look at like distributions of medicines and why certain things get used the way they are. Like the tobacco industry is deliberately trying to addict you to that substance by giving it to you in an amount that will do that to you. If
Right.
they sold tiny, short little cigarettes that were similar to one hitters that wouldn't get you addicted but could give you that nice little relax, that wouldn't be good for business.
It's wild how much, like, I'm kind of curious with this concept of addiction, and maybe this could be a whole different, this could probably be a whole different episode topic, but I'm curious if addiction is less of a human issue and more of like a Western issue, like that part of that Western ideology. Because I'm curious, I don't know, and I don't know if we could ever have any accounts of, I guess native peoples struggling with addiction or cultures older than whatever we have on
Yeah,
record. Like, I don't know if we even have that knowledge.
we
I'm
do.
curious. Oh, we do?
You have to go yeah, you do. You have to go to the people individually and talk to them because a lot of that culture is passed down orally. Like sometimes stuff does get written down when an individual wants to go and do that, but it's not necessarily the way that things are done. But there very much is that other side of history that you can get by going and talking to the people. But the thing is, you're probably not going to get anything out of them because like there's nothing that native people hate more than having a bunch of anthropologists and people like that coming around to poke their noses in and learn things about the culture, because historically it's been like nonstop robbery, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just like, here we
Yeah.
go again. It's summer and the anthropologists are fucking coming in to take our culture and to try and tell us things that they know about us better than we know ourselves,
Yeah, to
sort of
take our
thing. So it's
culture
like,
and sell books about it.
and also act like they know more, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why like anthropologists are actually really fucking hated in a lot of indigenous communities across Turtle Island. Like they just are not fucking having any of it. And honestly, a lot of it's misrepresentation. Like I was reading in a book that apparently the Aztecs didn't practice human sacrifice. They had knowledge of herbs to the point that they could slow the human heart down so that they could do surgeries. And when the Spanish saw it, they had no idea that you could actually be doing that level of surgery, and they naturally just thought it was something ridiculous like human sacrifice. And they burnt all the books. The Spanish Inquisition like went out of their way to destroy every single written text, and then history is written by the winners, right? So all they had to do is kill the people who had the knowledge and destroy all the recorded knowledge, and they could say whatever they want. When actually hearing it, like from what I'm reading from like the other side, that was like an open heart surgical practice that they were developing. And like a lot, and like when you look at where the drugs that we use now that like slow hearts so that they can do open heart surgery, they still steal it from indigenous people, but then also gaslight them and tell them that those practices weren't actually what they were doing. It's so fucking insidious, right? So that's why a lot of people don't want to tell anybody shit, because it's just like this horrible relationship of exploitation that's never been fair.
Yeah. I
Not
can't.
to rant, but like
No, I just
it's an
No, I
issue.
would. I mean, I won't lie. I would need a lot more research into that. Like, I would need to see like academia
Yeah.
on that.
And I'm
But
not going to like claim that that's objectively truthful. That's just something I had
right.
read in a book that was written by an indigenous person,
No, but
right?
the sheer fact that it could be,
it's plausible.
I absolutely
Mhm.
understand that. Yeah,
Yeah, it's totally
And to
absolutely.
me,
plausible.
from how much I've seen on like when I actually do talk to people and read these books and see these things and get the other side of history, it's ridiculous the amount of lies and propaganda that goes on universally, because that's a colonialist tactic, right?
Hmm.
So hearing it from the other side is always really eye-opening, you know. And I'm far more likely to believe it just from what I've seen evidence from how much they lie about everyone. Like everybody got lied to about by the colonizers. Like they lied about the Irish, they lied about the Vikings, they lied about people in the Middle East, they lied about people in Africa, they lied about
Mhm.
people in Asia. Like they stereotype and belittle every single person and denigrate their culture
Mhm.
and society and treat them like they're backwards savages. And that word even is a slur to a lot of people, right? And then like they wonder why there's still this like hostility in response to that, you know. And I think that like if people were to take the time more to hear those stories and hear those perspectives from their side of history and actually really be compassionate and hear them instead of trying to talk over them, then we'd probably be at a different point historically right now. But people traditionally tend to be a lot more defensive over what they've learned, right? Because I don't know. Actually don't know why people are defensive, but we are. You know, we're slow to change, and that's just human nature.
I recently, I don't want to say recent, maybe a couple months ago, I remember watching Disney's Pocahontas with
Oh my
Joyce,
god.
because I was like, oh my god, like I knew what we were getting into. I was like, all right, let's see this cultural appropriation bullshit that we were fed as children. But I was like, but the music's pretty, right? So that's fine. So we watched it, and the music was, Disney's always got its music down. I think we can all agree on that. Disney's got some good songs.
Mhm.
But one of the fucking songs, though, like the lyrics, it's like when the guys just land. I think when they're building their little base, when they park their boat on the shore and they start building their little base. Because they were there as a mining expedition. That was the plot of that movie. Um, but anyway, so the song, they're going savages, savages, blah blah blah, and I'm like, wait a minute, hold
Uh,
up, this is, ooh. um, and that's what they referred to the natives in, throughout the movie, like they called them
mhm.
savages, like the whole time. And thinking about like how I must have been, what, 6 years old, 7 years old, watching Pocahontas and being like, wow, like Pocahontas is cool, but the rest are savages. Like that's just like kind of the way they do that. Um and it's just it's so it's wild to see the amount of propaganda that we are fed. And
Mhm.
that's kind of one of the things that I'm trying to, I guess, make more of an effort to do, because I always remember in history class they were always like, the best history that you'll ever read is from a primary source. Identify a primary source. What's a primary source? Well, it's something from someone who lived in that time, whether it's a letter, a photograph, a newspaper clipping. You know what I mean? Like that's a primary source. So that's kind of what I've been trying to do. So I'm still working on like a modern polyhedral divination dice system that's based off of the platonic solids. And so I started looking up
Yeah.
articles about the platonic solids, and I was like, well, I don't care about your interpretation of the platonic solids and what Plato was talking about and all this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
I was like, where, and all these articles were saying, oh, it's mentioned in I think it's Timaeus, I think that's the name of it. I printed it out, but it's mentioned in this one, Plato's lectures or whatever they were called. It's in this particular one, and so I went on sacred texts actually, and it was there, totally, just available and open, because it's like all, I think that's all public knowledge at this
Mhm.
point, all the classic
Yep.
stuff. And so I printed it out and I'm going through it and I'm making notes, and I went right to that primary source. Granted, it's a translation, but it's the closest I could
Mhm.
fucking get. And it's not just someone else's, regurgitation of that material. Like, no, it's actually translated Plato's writings. Um
I will say this, if you want to fuck with the platonic solid system, like slide into my DMs after the show because like I have some serious working idea with the platonic solids in correlation to what element they represent. Like for example, the tetrahedron's fire, the cube is
Mm.
earth, the octahedron is air, the dodecahedron is spirit, and the icosahedron is water. Yeah, boy, I got them memorized.
That's good because I actually did not have them memorized, and I've been reading about them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's just like one of those things, right? So this idea of going back to these primary sources and not just like reading the regurgitated bullshit that we've been fed over and over and over again, because not only one, it's boring. I don't want to hear about the same history. There has to be a different angle to this I haven't read about before. There has to be what about the other side, what about other voices? And that's something that I'm trying to do, to kind of I guess Sophia, you were kind of talking about this, like this idea of decolonizing oneself.
Hmm.
And so that's
Mhm.
I suppose in a way that's kind of one of the things that I'm doing to decolonize in a way, and kind of get back to I just want to know the reality. I just want reality. I don't want
Mhm.
the fake constructed reality that has been fed to us for the longest time, and is still continuing to be fed to us. And sometimes I still slip into it, and I fall, and I go, no, this isn't right. I need to rethink what I'm doing. And really the two main things are going back and kind of reading the other side, looking at primary sources, but also um getting in touch with my immediate surroundings, identifying these plants. What are these animals? Is that a particular type of what? Like, I look out my window and I'm like, oh, birds. But I'm like, but there's actually like 4 varieties of birds out there. Like, what kind of
Hmm.
birds are they?
Mhm.
And that's
Did you know
it's
that you
this.
can talk with them and like make calls back at them and they'll respond to you?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Um,
Hmm.
and I was just kind of curious, like, so the two things that I'm doing, I'm trying to like identify and categorize, right? Like that's really what I'm doing. I'm just trying to learn about the animals, plants, everything around me, and by also learning about them, just from a scientific perspective, an academic perspective, a folklore perspective. I'm taking all of
Mhm.
those perspectives. Like I'm jotting down, their textbook information, if you will, but then also searching, the folklore behind them. Um, I was curious if if because like I was saying earlier, we talk big games, right? We always talk about we need to do this, we need to do that. And but those are the two things that I've kind of committed myself to, is this idea of like, you know, um going back to primary sources and learning about the world around me.
Mhm.
um I was curious if either of you have kind of been thinking of, have either like made a commitment or thinking about making a particular commitment, to doing a particular practice to help you sort of reconnect or decolonize, or however you want to.
Yeah. So I'll jump off on that because I have very strong feelings on that. Because like when I say decolonize, I'm taking lead off of like other indigenous people who I've been learning from
Yeah.
on like a journey that I'm on. But it's wildly personal, and I'm not going to go into it too much on the podcast because A, I would probably have to ask approval from somebody. B, I would probably have to properly represent a group, which I don't have one that claims me, and it's so complicated. So I have the way that I relate to it personally, and I'm trying to learn as much as I can because I've been encouraged by other people to do so. And that's why I'm walking down that path, and I actually was really shying away from talking about it for a long time because I
Mm.
didn't know how to approach it. And I was actually having this thought the other night, like it would have been so much fucking easier for in my life if I had turned out to not be part native, right? It could have been so much simpler to just be like just a person from one culture who can be like, okay, even if I was just 100% white, right? Then I could be like, okay, well, I can just learn and take cues from people and do my best to be humble and help people who are in different situations. But that's not my reality. So I kind of have to get stuck in this like determine what my world's going to be process, and I don't like Western like colonized life, and that's not like the group of people who I fell in with growing up. Like my friends were always all the native kids in my town, right? Like I was
Mm-hmm.
hanging out with all of them all the time. Like every single native kid I can think of in my high school, I was friends with all of them, right?
Right.
And like it's where I've always been called to. So I'm trying to walk towards those practices if I am accepted by communities that will have me. And there are people in Alberta who I've talked to who are like, yeah, come visit us. And I don't know how that would go, and I'm not going to speak for them at all. But I would like to walk towards that and learn as much as I can and see what that is. And if that happens, that's great. And if not, I'm still going to continue on the path that I am on right now, which is like working with the land in a way that doesn't require me to be a part of the culture, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of damage that's been done that you as an individual can just start doing, right? Like for example, when people go and start planting forests to counter climate change, something that people don't even realize that they're doing that's harmful is they monocrop. They'll take a single tree that
Yeah.
gets factory farmed, they plant it all across, you get a forest that's not biodiverse. They essentially like take over everything, and it becomes really harsh. Like if you know anything about
Hmm.
the redwoods, like the sequoias, they're huge trees, but they're so nutrient intense that not a lot of other stuff can grow in that forest, and it tends to be rather empty, right? So there's a certain level of balance that creates a healthy ecosystem and like allows the land to be healthy for both the animals, the air, the water, and the people, right? And a lot of that has to do with like eliminating trash and pollution. That's probably one of the biggest things. And then introducing trees that are biodiverse and going to pull carbon dioxide out of the air. But what my one friend, who's also indigenous, was teaching me, and he's younger, he's like a youth, he's really good kid. He's like, I treat him like a brother because he's my best friend, brother.
Mm.
We're all really close. And he was talking about how certain trees can actually draw the water table up in an area if you plant them in certain spots, right?
Huh.
And so I'm kind of in a project with him where we're looking at how we can take trees and put them in certain areas to draw the nutrient bed up and get at some of that deeper table water, and then start planting other stuff around it that not only people can eat but other animals can eat, and it can start re-nourishing the area, right? And another project I personally really wanted to get in on with him was there's like a really long trail across Canada called the Trans Canada Trail, and it's really unsafe for a lot of people who don't have access to like buses,
Mm-hmm.
or resources to travel in between towns, because sometimes hitchhiking is really risky. So
It's not like a
the
carpool
dream,
service or something.
well, I mean, the dream has been to set up like a path network that people could walk across the country
Mm.
that has it that has like food plants all along it that are like relative to the regions that they grow up in. So it's not like you're going to be putting Saskatoon berries in British Columbia, right? But
Mm-hmm.
the idea is to have a path that people could travel along and actually get food from, but then also spread that food out into the land around it so that it doesn't center animals on it. But then it's like it's a really complex idea, because then you'd also have to talk with the people who those lands belong to
Right.
traditionally, because I'm not going to go to the Canadian colonizing government and ask them for any lick of permission for shit, because they have no actual right to that land, in my personal opinion, and I will
Mm-hmm.
take jail time over that if I have to. But I would go to the people whose lands that is and ask them if that's an appropriate thing that we could do. So there's a lot of things that I want to do as far as like um putting wild rice in areas where people don't necessarily want it to be, because
Mm-hmm.
that actually can go on to feeding like indigenous populations out here, because they used to eat it a lot before like colonization, right? And a lot of that has to do with like how water sources get used for entertainment, and rice eats up waterfront property because it kind of looks like a weed to people, right? So there's been like even battles over that in Canada over here with like some people getting really mad at indigenous people like just gathering rice on the land, you know? So I kind of want
Maybe
to just
that's
say fuck y'all and go plant rice everywhere now and like let people have food because there's people who are still starving, you know?
I was kind of thinking, I was like, that's actually kind of a cool idea. Like, just
Hmm.
drop like food seeds, like just for different plants that are edible, and like tomato
Hmm.
plants, and just like pop a tomato plant on in a park, like
But
Mm-hmm.
it's gotta be appropriate, you know? And that's another thing I think we really need to start doing is like think global, act local, right? So if you want to reduce carbon emissions, plants are going to do that. And you have so much green space in the city that gets wasted on producing stuff like lawns that don't necessarily take a large amount of carbon dioxide out. If you even wanted to switch over to, say, using a moss lawn instead, it would be much more nutrient rich and it would actually pull out a lot more carbon dioxide by comparison. Like
Mm-hmm.
what we do for our modern lawn system is actually a detriment on the
yeah,
planet
yeah,
because
it's
like
awful.
grasses don't stand up to heat that well. You have to constantly be watering them. It's an incredibly intense on the water table system because very often people use pesticides to keep out medicine plants that they think are weeds because what they want is a nice cultivated field for playing baseball in or some shit, you
When
know?
I
So like go ahead.
when I finally buy a house, it will have a yard. That is a requirement for me. But
Mhm.
when I finally buy a house, I'm committed to putting in moss lawns for sure.
Mhm. They're rad. Moss and clover are really
Mm-hmm.
tight, even though I don't think clover is natural to the region, but clover is still pretty good because animals actually eat it and it's not like harmful from what I understand, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to speak for anybody on that. But that's what I was going to say is we could really work on converting like in city green spaces over to stuff that's like actually useful for drawing carbon out of the air as well as feeding people in a humane manner, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So,
What were you going to say, Scott? Because I kind of just dominated there.
Oh, what in response to Jay's question, how are we like decolonizing
Hmm.
yeah,
that?
that's kind of what I
Yeah.
was just about to ask you, Scott. I was just curious if you've kind of made any commitments, and if you haven't,
So
like, don't feel pressured. It was just kind of a question.
no, of course not. I mean, it's funny because like, okay, so I've talked about before how like decolonizing, I was really lucky in a lot of ways. Decolonizing started early for me because when I was going to grade school here in South Philly, I went to, well, in my experience, what was in my class, because I was in a learning disabled class, right?
Mm-hmm.
As all the kids called it, LD,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of the kids in my class were black, and it took me it. I didn't understand. They kind of, without ever meaning to, they kind of forced me to understand like the differences between like our experiences, right?
Right.
But of course they were young, so it of course turned to me. It came out as bullying, and I mean they probably we were kids, and kids don't know. You know what I mean?
Right. Kids just
And
react.
they bullied me a lot for differences that I didn't understand.
Right.
Um, but of course later I grew up, and not to say that it didn't damage the shit out of me, but I later understood, and even then I started to. It helped me realize early that black people were people. So as
Right.
far as like my whiteness in relation to blackness was concerned, that started my journey at like, in grade school, right? Without ever knowing it, right? And then it just became easier over time for me to start to absorb information. Not that like, and Jay, I'm sure that like, and Sophia, I'm sure that all three of us have experienced, when you're decolonizing and you're hit with something that like wants to like, your instinct is to feel attacked,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Oh yeah, I've
you have to
having a
like,
fight with somebody on a server about that.
you have to lean into that, right? Like that's the work, right? It's funny because therapy has also taught me that when you're having like these experiences, you have to lean into them and not run away from them, which is when that's how that happens. That's how like the toxicity occurs, because you want to run, and then you run and then you lash out. But instead of doing that, you lean
Yep.
further into it, and all of a sudden, when you lean into these experiences, suddenly you're breaking through them and you're listening, like active listening. And so I guess like that part happens organically for me. But as far as like what I actively do, I guess in my nature, right? Like I intentionally go out and I listen to like people talk about like real history, like not the whitewash bullshit history that we have
Right.
here in the States. Like not the bullshit that we got in high school and grade school, the pilgrims and the Indians were best friends,
Right.
that
Right.
kind of bullshit.
Ugh.
Uh, by the way, Native Americans, not Indians. And like for people, I
Unfortunately,
just use that because that's what we're taught.
I
That's what I
will.
was trying to say there. Um,
I will
I actually, can I chip
say.
in there for a short aside?
Mhm.
Indian is
mhm.
actually correct in certain parts of America. Native American is used in Canada simply because those are the terms that the government used. In certain parts in America, they will just call themselves Indians 100% of the time.
Hmm, I did
Okay.
not know that.
So
Yeah.
it's definitely one of those things that, like,
It's
if I ever
nuanced.
have the opportunity, I would ask what they would prefer to be. Um,
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
but what you call it? So anyway, so I actively like to listen to people, like, in particular, like, I want to, I try to search out like people in who are like black people in educated spaces, like professors, psychologists,
Hmm.
scientists, and I want to listen to like their input
You
just
want
because
you
I
want an
trust that
academic take on it, but you want it to still be from.
because I want it because I
Right.
know that they're not going to give me like like they're going to obviously have like an understanding of, like if they're a black scientist, right, or a black ecologist, they're going to understand how gentrification and
Mm,
how like the reason like sanitation, stuff like that, or whatever, you know what I'm saying.
Hmm.
May not be an ecologist for that, but you get what I'm saying. um and it's the same thing all around. But I also like to learn about, like Sophia, I like to learn about the history. Like I go on like as far as like native people are concerned, like I just read. That's what I'm trying to get at. I read sources like from first person sources, I read academic sources, and I learn, and I'm open to listening. And also I guess I've taken to this approach where when I'm in an experience, so both of you know I'm not a I don't like a fight. I'm not a fighter.
Mm.
However, thanks to therapy, I've learned how to not be so afraid to stand up. So like, I'm able to kind of be like, hey, that's bullshit. Why would you say something like that? You know what I
Mm.
mean?
Hmm.
And maybe not necessarily in such an aggressive tone, because I find that you get further with sugar than you do with sour a lot of the time, in my experience. But um, I am able to kind of raise my voice louder, and so I don't know. I guess it's all very just. I just make it a part of living my life. I don't really know if that makes sense, but as far as like like as far as like nature is concerned, um I try to one understand, like Sophia was talking about, like uh plants and natural things that are indigenous to where I am located bioregionally, right? And then I also like to learn about like my Appalachian ancestors, and I like to learn about their medicine and their magic, um and what that means. And that's kind of where I was just reading, I just bought there's an author, his name is Jake Richards, and he grew up in Appalachia. He's young. He's my age, our age somewhere.
Hmm.
Um, and he grew up in Appalachia, and he was talking about, his experiences and folk medicine and folk magic and stuff. So yeah, I hope that kind of explained things, you
It
know?
does. Yeah. Yeah. It does. So it seems like we're all kind of doing similar things. I mean, Sophia is probably on a more unique sort of path, just because I mean that's your culture, it's your blood, it's your
yeah.
history.
And I'm dropping show notes for you, so there's going to be referenced for people the books where I've been taking this information out of.
That'll be great.
Um Yeah, that way, if you're looking for sources, I'm actually providing stuff instead of just talking out my ass.
I know, because usually what'll happen is, in a couple weeks from now when I go to edit this, I'll be like, "Hey, Sophia, so these
Mhm.
4 books that you mentioned," and then I'll be like, "Hey, Scott, that YouTube video you mentioned."
Right. It,
It's all good.
And I'm double linking you to on where you can
Honestly,
purchase these books too.
I've gotten to the point, because I do listen to this entire episode again. I do the show notes when I edit, because there's no point in paying attention right now, because I'm just gonna hear it all again.
Hmm.
oh,
There we go.
Awesome.
What about you, Jay? What are you doing to actively decolonize?
Well, I was kind of saying, like, basically what I've been doing is really cataloging and identifying the space around me, is what I really been doing, especially with plants and animals, and just really trying to understand the space that I occupy, and also my
mhm,
impact on it. Because I'm working in my back bedroom right now, and because I got this whole. I'll have to send you a picture of my setup. I'm actually quite proud of it. It's very nice. Um, so I got my little home office set up, and there is a bird's nest in the wall of that room, like literally like you can hear them inside the wall. And you can see exactly where the hole is. It's like a hole in the brick, 'cause it's an old house. This is a house that my grandmother lived in, my cousin lived in, it's been passed down, and it'll be sold once me and Joyce move out. So and you see the birds all day, and you hear them all day. They're loud. Mom's out there. She's bringing back all kinds of fun stuff for the kids. And the kids are very loud inside this nest. And it really made me think. I was like, I wonder, because at one point they were just so loud, and I was like, oh my god, these fucking birds. Um, and I was like, well, I wonder if I should, oust them out of the nest, or, you know what I mean? Like most people would do in the city if there's birds living in your wall. Um, and I kind of was like, no, that's so terrible. Why, like, they're not busting through the wall. There's no hole, so they're not getting into my actual house, right? They're just inside the wall, right? And I
Hmm.
was like, well, they're not bothering me. I wear headphones, while I'm working, so I just turn the volume up, and if they're a little too chatty. And I'm like, why would I oust a family? That's
right.
that's a family of living creatures. And I see that this mama bird, like, she works hard. Like, she is constantly back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I I was like, no, I can't do that. But I also am not telling my grandfather that there's a bird's nest in the back room wall, because I know he'll be like, "Ah, we gotta get them out of," and I'll be like, So I'm not even mentioning it to him. Um, but yeah, and
Yeah.
because I'm like, we're in their space. We were here first. This house was built, like, there was like trees here, and those trees were knocked the fuck over and cut down, and then a brick house was built there, and all the birds that lived in those trees, those birds' ancestors, if you will, lived in those trees, and we got rid of them. And so, well, now this brick dwelling, they've found a way to adapt and live inside this brick dwelling, and who am
Mhm.
I to take that away from them? Now, if they started busting through like, if there was a hole into the house, then yeah, I would have to patch the hole, but I still wouldn't flush the birds out. As long as I can keep them out, as long as I can keep them out there and me in here, then I'm fine. And so that's just kind of like how I've been doing. And, I've just been thinking more about where I fit into my local, I guess, circle of life kind of situation. Um,
I get that.
and I have felt increasingly more mentally at peace. And I've also been doing this little thing too, where I've been um focusing on one thing at a time. Because I think a lot of colonization, Western culture, city life, however you want to call it, has really forced me. I always want to think fast. I gotta do this. I can't just, like, um, vacuum a room. I have to vacuum the house, and then let's pull all the rocks out of this, and then let's do this, and then let's go over here. And I'm like, well, I have like 2 hours before I have to go to bed. Like, what the fuck am I doing? So and it's really been since the camping trip, because I spent that whole camping trip just I would literally, like, after we were out fishing or walking around or whatever, I literally took my chair, because we had a really nice view of the lake. I literally took my chair, took my boots off, propped my feet up on this little, wood plank that was there, and I just smoked, and I looked out at the lake through the trees. And that was it. Like, I just chilled, and I just absorbed. And that's what I did. Like, I had my weed, I had my nature, and I was all set. And I had a comfy chair. You know what I mean? Like, I was just it was really nice. And ever since that, I was like, wow, I slowed down. And guess what? The podcast didn't implode. The world didn't end. Everything's still fine. My bills are paid. I should slow down in my day-to-day life. I should slow down. And I have been, believe it or not. Which is probably why I've been really quiet on our chats and stuff, because I've been just kind of chilling and a little busy here and there. But
I feel like, that's a good thing, right? I mean,
yeah.
That means you're kind of taking the advice of this. And, like, at the end of the day, that's kind of what the whole point is about when people say getting back to nature, right? Like, falling in line with the cycles of nature. Nature doesn't move fast, Nature, it takes its time, but it always gets there. You know what I mean? So it's a good thing that you're falling into that rhythm.
Right.
You know what I'm
and
saying?
Speaking
Like,
of falling into a rhythm, what was really, really cool, and that I noticed, and even Joyce noticed right away. So the people I went camping with are my D&D group, basically. And we're all nerds. Some of us wake up early. Some of us, we're the type, we're night owls. We stay up late, wake up late, whatever. We were up basically 20 minutes after sunrise every day. Like, our bodies fell into that circadian rhythm so easily. And it's not like we were waking up like groggy or like we would wake up like none of us set alarms. We just all naturally woke up around a little bit after sunrise. It was like 6:30, 7 o'clock. We all started kind of waking up, and it just felt right. And I was like, I should try and incorporate more of this into my daily life as much as I can.
Yeah, honest to God, it's a dream of mine to have property where I can live in a house that isn't necessarily a big square house. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm gonna have one similar to this, like a cabin for the winter years, but I absolutely don't want to live in a fucking house during the summer. I would tent in a backyard and have like bathrooms set up nearby and be very fucking happy with that. And then maybe have like an indoor space, like a cabin I can go in to do shit and like cook and use the stove and like maybe play video games or some shit or access my computer, because you don't want to like have your computers out in like the wet potentially wet
I'm telling you,
environment,
Sophia, you remind me of Starhawk so much, because she, like, when you were Starhawk, she's a really prominent Wiccan author. She was like, I think in like the 70s and 80s, and she did a lot of like she was involved in so many protests and all kinds of stuff. And she even did jail time, for some of some of her protests, and like how you were saying earlier, like, I'll take jail time, over whatever. But she lives in California, but she lives pretty remote out in California, but she has like internet and she has like modern amenities, but she still lives very close to land. Like, she's a really good example, and kind of like what you're envisioning, or she's a really good example of living a modern life with nature, right? Like, you don't have to become a caveman. You don't have to.
Ariane and I talk about that all the time, about like how we want to homestead. We still want like internet and stuff like that, but it's funny because like me and Darren were saying, we don't even really need a TV because we don't watch TV. Everything we watch is online.
Right. A TV is just a monitor. Honestly, it's just a big monitor at this point.
Right.
Yep.
Like, we could just have computers, and just watch what we want to watch.
Or tablets.
whatever, right? But I was like, I want to grow a lot of our medicine. I want to grow a lot of our food. The good thing, like me and Darian, I noticed we're starting to get into like eating more vegetables that I didn't really like before. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love vegetables. I tend to like green vegetables, asparagus,
Mm-hmm.
broccoli, that kind of stuff. But I'm like learning to like peppers and stuff like
Mm.
that. Um, and if mushrooms are made correctly, I'm learning how to like mushrooms.
Also depends
Um,
on the mushroom too.
yeah. But the thing is like, growing our own food and stuff like that. We're curious about keeping bees to
Mm.
help not many, probably honestly just about one really, but
Mm-hmm.
um just to have our own supply of locally sourced honey, you know
And
um
pollinators for your garden.
right, exactly, yep. And also it takes care of the bees, you know what I mean, it keeps them
Mm-hmm.
safe. um yeah, 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 I completely agree. It's like this goal is to have a decent sized home, nothing crazy, and a nice amount of property that I don't have neighbors because I really don't want neighbors, and and just live my life.
It's wild because high school me wanted to live in Center City in like a really cool apartment and like live this very cool, hip, urban, young person life. Um, and as I got older and really into college, and especially now, um, yeah, I'm like the complete opposite. And I just think, I think about that a lot because I wanted a very different life for myself in high school
Hmm.
versus
Hmm.
what I want now. And I'm curious, and sometimes I'm like, I guess they're both valid because I wanted them at one point, genuinely. I just changed.
Also, one thing I want to point out while I remember it, there's a search engine that I advocate everybody switch to called Ecosia. I linked it
I
in
saw
show
that.
notes. Y'all, I have to fucking go off about this. It is only powered by solar energy. They
Hmm.
generate so much electricity through solar energy, they generate twice the amount of energy they need. So they actually sell power back to the grid for and basically removes dirty energy from the grid, and the profits from this go towards planting trees that are specifically biodiverse and not monocropped. And like I was reading over their models and I'm like, oh my god, something like this exists. And it's like it's got me so excited because it's a model of how you can use modern technology that's renewable to plant trees. And each search you use from Ecosia, according to them, removes in the end 2 kilograms of carbon dioxide from the air. Uh, think about how much of an impact that would have if everybody just started switching over to this. Um, and like sure there's ads on it, but instead of it going to like a massive Google archive where they're collecting it and info dumping or to sell and make billions of dollars, it's going to like actually help fix the planet. So like there's little things that you can start doing like that and little ways that we can start converting over and actually start generating systems that renew and are carbon negative instead of carbon neutral, because it's the only way that you're actually going to start fixing stuff is if you start removing it from the environment, because like it's not just going to just magically go away. Like we're generating at a rate faster, sorry, hiccups, we're generating at a rate faster right now than we can currently remove. And the only way to actually start fixing that is to get every company to start being carbon negative, right? So once we can have people who are like switched over to clean energy, like making sure that a certain amount of their profits have to go towards like reforestation efforts and like reseeding the land, like these are all just things that we can mandate through legislation. And you can prove that it works in small scale through things like Ecosia. And I want to like encourage anybody who has like a good idea for like a green energy source or a way to like generate a small company that can start doing the stuff like this, that moves away. Like a huge thing is paper. The paper industry chews up a fuck ton of like old growth forests and the lumber industry too, right? Like a lot of these we can switch over to more sustainable methods. Like rather than cutting old growth forests, we can literally tree farm trees of the exact type of wood that we want and grow them for that express purpose while having them actively remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere rather than just fucking devastate the lungs of our planet, you know?
Mhm,
Like
mhm,
there's so much better ways that we can be doing it, and it's just a choice that we have to actively make, you know?
mhm.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Absolutely.
Um, I mean, we're coming up on just about 2 hours, a little under.
I
Um,
figured it was gonna be a longer episode when you get a bunch of us talking about nature.
oh yeah, I mean, and plus we haven't recorded for a while, so we had a lot to
Mhm.
catch up on. Um,
Mhm.
it's
Definitely.
it's funny. It's actually really on theme. So after I'm done this recording, because I don't have to go to bed as early now, because I don't have to wake up as early as I used to.
Ooh.
So I could stay up and play video games. Um, and I've been playing the Final Fantasy VII remake because we got it for free a couple
Oh,
months
it's
ago
good. It's
on PS
fucking
Plus.
good.
It's real. First of all, it's amazing. I've never played the original, so this is all new to me, and I
Mhm.
don't really know anything about the game. But the fact that it seems that the main plot is this evil corporation is sucking all the like Mako, so whatever this energy source out of the planet is
It's the
it's
planet's
pretty.
life.
Yeah, it's literally the planet's life force. It's pretty spot on.
Right.
Mhm.
Pretty spot on. And so I'm very invested in the plot of this game.
And and it's not just about that too, it's also incredibly spot on about class warfare and, like,
Yes.
the divide between the poor and the rich and how they, like, literally dehumanize them and treat them as complete expendable, and, like, I'm not gonna spoil anything, but Jesus Christ, it is
Yeah.
the most absolute anti-capitalist spot on Final Fantasy I think I have ever seen, and I was like, "We need this.
Yeah,
We need it in this
I'm here for
game."
it. I'm definitely here for
Mhm.
it. And all I
And,
can
like,
say is I really
Barrett giving that
identify with
speech.
Barrett.
Oh. Mhm.
Yeah, I really identify with Barrett.
Yeah, when he's like, "He ain't a good man if he works for an evil corporation." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Fuck yeah, man. I
Yeah.
feel you on that."
I just
Ah.
wish I was as buff as him. That's the only thing I'm lacking.
I
One
um
I
day.
also love,
One day.
like, just all the characters in that game. They're so well done. Like, Tifa's great, you
yeah,
know?
the whole game is gorgeous. I one day I will go back and play the original 7 to kind of compare. But I love the game, but it's very very spot on. It's
Mm,
good thing for me to transition to after recording this episode.
mhm.
So any final concluding thoughts that anyone kind of
I
wanted
have a
to?
few.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, so I just want everyone to remember that nothing is just a plant, that many things you don't think are medicine absolutely are, and that just because it can be medicine doesn't mean it can't kill you. So respect plants and plant spirits, and that nature, if cared for, can also help bring us back together as humanity. Put humanity back into mankind.
I like that.
Mhm. I would say, be nice to insects. Uh, talk to animals because they actually can understand you a lot more than you give them credit for. Um, show respect, and respect will be given to you. And
Mm-hmm.
like, don't hesitate to give offerings, you know?
Mm.
Nature loves when you put the foot forward and give something that's relevant to you, you know, whether that be some tobacco, whether that be some bread and honey, you know,
Definitely
whatever it is
salt.
that
Definitely.
is, yeah, whatever that is for you, start developing that relationship with the land again because I'm sure she misses you and
Mhm.
wants to hear from you, you know. And
And
Absolutely.
to quote somebody else, and I'm probably going to misquote this, but I'm going to find where the quote's from. Um, that what you don't develop a relationship with, you will always treat as a stranger and destroy.
mm,
I
I'm
love that.
probably getting that
And
a little
very
wrong,
well
but
said.
yeah.
mm.
Absolutely.
I love that. Also, no salt in the soil either. Do not put salt on the ground. Don't be doing
Use
that.
eggshell powder.
Yes, use eggshell powder. All right. So, with that, we had a really good conversation, and yeah, I am looking forward to getting into us recording more regularly. I feel nice and refreshed, so we're definitely going to keep this going. And we also have more guests planned. We do have a lot of guests that we want to bring onto the show, so we're going to be hearing a lot more voices. But for now, we are going to sign off, and I'm going to go play Final Fantasy. And
Hell yeah.
and we will see you in the next one.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Conservative.
Conservative man.
The militias are gonna take back the country on December 21st, 2021.
No,
just you wait. Now it's 12/21/21.
No,
Didn't you hear?
This is the scene that I picture. For some reason, Scott, you're like visiting him in this house, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're like sitting in a rocking chair knitting. I picture you knitting for some reason. You got these little glasses down on your nose, and he's like, "The leftists are coming, the militias," and you're like, "That's nice." Mm-hmm.
And he's like in a fucking rocking chair, senile. And he's like, I need my plate carrier. God damn it! I told you I ordered 762 by 39, not 45. How am I gonna use these?
And I'm sitting there reminding myself, knit one, purl two.
Yep.
Knit one, purl two.
Exactly. Welcome to your future.
Oh, God forbid.
God, I feel really bad. I mean, this is not gonna keep going before we start the episode, but like, I feel really bad for like nursing home workers for 20 years from now, maybe even 10 years from now when this starts happening. You're gonna have all of these fucking ridiculous prepper alt-right dudes getting sold. They can't even fucking take care of themselves anymore, and then they're gonna have to put up with all the vitriol that they could ever muster, because God knows they're gonna get shittier the less able they get.
It's gonna be wild. Definitely.
On the bright side, though, if I can get to the age of 80, I'll be 80 in the year 426, or it'll be 2069, and then I could live through April. So if I get to April 20th, then I can live for 4/20/69.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's goals. That's goals right there.
So we'll see if we make it to 80. And if I have to self-sacrifice in some like brilliant ball of fire, I'll be like, tell 4/20/69 I said hi.
Reminds me of this stupid form. My insurance wouldn't cover my gyno visit. So, of course, because they're like, but you're a man. And I'm like, how many times have I explained to you fucking people? So anyway, we had a fight with the insurance, and usually Joyce does that for me because I hate calling them. So Joyce is like, yeah, sure, I'll call them and yell at them. So Joyce calls the insurance, and they're like, oh, well, you can't speak on his behalf. And Joyce is like, he's my fucking husband. Like, we're married. Like, I don't understand. What the hell are you talking about? So apparently, I think it's because Joyce was like, oh, my husband is trans, and they're probably like, whoa, red flag, hold on, stop, we need a form. Like, we need a form here. So I had to fill out this form authorizing Joyce to, but like a HIPAA form kind of thing to like speak about
the whole to allow them to speak for you. Yeah.
I mean, it turns out that you do have to fill out this form even if you are married. I did learn that, but that just means that because with all my top surgery stuff, they were breaking HIPAA anyway. So like they've been breaking HIPAA because Joyce was the one who argued with them to cover it and shit. So
even
it's
with
just fucking hilarious.
Parent and child, if the child is of a certain age, you still have to sign it too.
Yeah.
Even if they're a parent.
But they were like, this form is effective for 1 year unless specified otherwise. So I made the form valid for 50 years. Said this form will expire in 50 years. And Joyce is like, did you really put this for 50 years? I was like, we'll reevaluate in 50 years. I don't know what to tell you.
You're like, look,
We'll
man,
have a
I don't make
meeting.
the rules. I don't make the rules. It just said set your expiry date here, and I didn't want to fuck around. So
Right, so it's 50 years, and we'll have a discussion. If we're still alive.
that'll be in 4/2069.
Oh shit. Check that out.
In 2069, yeah, it'll have been 50 years. Actually, it'll be right at the year after, because you did it in 2020,
Yeah.
didn't you?
No, I did in 21.
21. Okay, then, yeah, 71. Oh, alrighty.
Well, are we
How you
ready?
feeling about? Here's a question.
Mm.
Would you like maybe want to start recording as soon as we start hanging out with each other? Because like I love
usually
our
do.
pre-episode bullshit sessions. Yeah, and maybe having a couple of them work their way in would be fun.
Yeah, sometimes if we say something funny or cool in the kind of pre-episode chatty part, I will put it in at the end. I'll put it in
cool.
after the outro. It's like a bonus. It's like an Easter egg kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I'll put it in. So it kind of like the outro fades out, and then you hear us again. It's usually us like, I think I put the one in there where you were like, we're like the Animaniacs, or I remember you said, Sophia, you're like, we're like the Animaniacs of witchcraft podcasts, or whatever the hell you were saying.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I dropped them in there. They're like Easter
You're
eggs.
Yakko.
Yeah.
I'm Dot, and Scott's Wacko because they have no gender.
Exactly.
That's true.
Yeah, I put that in there. So. But yeah, I do. Like right now, I've been recording for the past much since Scott got it. 6 minutes or so.
Fucking A.
Oh, so good. Wow. Nice, burning some nice rosemary.
I should burn some sweetgrass. Whoever did this braid that I have right now did a fucking pro level braid. Like, they even tied the ends with the braid itself, which is what you're supposed to do. Oh, I love sweetgrass.
So we're talking about
nature and the green path
fucking
and Yggdrasil and the fucking world tree, baby. Fucking plants, bud.
Speaking of plants, I don't know what they put in the pollen this year, but I'm not happy about it.
Speaking of plants, the cicadas are going to be out in a couple of days.
What?
Trillions of cicadas are going to be fucking coming on out.
I thought they're late summer, aren't they?
No.
Are they early summer?
We'll have them until late summer.
That's what it is.
Although I've heard that like city folk won't see them as much as like rural and suburban folk, but we'll hear them.